It's been seen in some people that have taken long-term antidepressants in the context of bipolar that they develop a chronic condition, meaning an ongoing condition of feeling irritable. Case studies absolutely have a place in scientific literature. They're often how we first become aware of something that should even be studied in the first place, right? They looked at the data for participants that had a depressive episode and were treated with antidepressants and then followed up with again later in a year. And in his research, he mentions that people who were treated with antidepressants were 10 times more likely to develop those acid symptoms than people who were not. It is normal to have that reduced effect over time. And it's also very, very common to need to change medications or adjust the approach over time as you're being treated. And it sounds like for you, you've essentially been ignored and left to feel like it was your fault for not getting any better. It can be really hard to feel motivated to show up, try your best when the company culture itself is a drain on your energy and your mental health. That's a recipe for long-term pain and burnout. One thing I would really encourage you to do is challenge the idea that you have no control over it. Our brains really, really don't like having lingering problems or lingering things that we haven't figured out yet. So this is just a process of, unwinding that ball of yarn, getting the threads in their place. They're still there, but they're going to be easier for you to work with. Hey friends, this is the Hardcore Self-Help Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Robert Duff. Today, I am excited to answer a few questions for you. Thank you to everybody who responded to my call for questions. It's been very helpful. I've gotten some more in, including some that I'll be talking about today. If you didn't hear, I need some more questions for the show for Q&A podcasts like this. You can easily reach me at duffthepsych@gmail.com or using the contact form on my website, duffthepsych.com. It's been a little bit crazy around here recently. I nearly chopped off my finger last night. I'm not showing anything graphic on the video, but bandaged thumb. I was making dinner last night and, chopping garlic and took a piece of my finger with it. Luckily, didn't need stitches, just glue, and lost a big portion of my nail, but things have been a little wild around here. So this episode is probably going to be coming out a little bit late. So thank you for your patience if you're listening to it right as it comes out. And I wanted to let you know that for the coming episodes for the rest of the year, things might be a little bit here and there. I'm planning on doing at least one more before the end of the year to talk about my year in review and talk about my word for the year. But probably just one more and then I'll be done for the holidays. So thank you for going through another year with me. And with all that said, why don't we jump into the first question for the day? All right, so first one reads, Hi. First of all, my compliments. Thanks for the podcast. I listened to every episode. Very well done. Pausing to say that's very impressive. There's over 420 episodes, so thank you. Now to my question. Could you please talk about antidepressant-associated chronic irritable dysphoria, or ACID is the acronym for that. Or maybe you know someone who has a lot of information on the topic and could talk on your show. I took various antidepressants for several years and developed severe depression with very strange and painful symptoms that I never had before. Now it won't go away and life is very difficult. I'm very concerned that doctors prescribe antidepressants often just in case and without thinking much, and then they continue to prescribe them for years even though it's clear that the medicine is not helping at all and the person is feeling worse and worse. It took me 6 years to realize that these antidepressants were probably the reason why my mental health had deteriorated so much, and who can say what the prognosis is? The damage could be permanent. P.S. I'm from Estonia, so you have fans from every faraway little mysterious country. Awesome. Thank you for tuning in from Estonia. Estonia is not mysterious. It's a place. A lot of people have heard of it. But thank you for the really good question. This is a great one. I'll admit that I had not heard of ACID before. ACID, the acronym that we're talking about here. But I love questions like this for the show that allow me to dive deep into the research and learn more, because that's how I stay sharp. Honestly, between my clinical work, seeing clients with, medical issues or different neurological things that I hadn't yet heard of, and this podcast, I've learned way more than I ever did in my training program. And it's a big part of how I continue staying, competent and aware. Luckily, I also get to use some of the hours spent researching for the podcast for my continuing education for licensure. So that's an awesome thing that's, changed in the past couple of years. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. Let me dive into the terminology and the disorder itself. Okay, so what is antidepressant-associated chronic irritable dysphoria, or ACID, which I'll call it from here on out? I would call ACID a proposed condition, meaning it's not something that's currently recognized as a medical or mental health condition in the literature or in the textbooks or the DSM, the ICD, any of the things that doctors use to diagnose. It's not something that is known and recognized right now. And there are a lot of these out there. Some of them eventually garner enough research support to be classified in the medical literature, and some do not. But very often there are these sort of proposed conditions. I'll also say that with the rise of social media, especially things like TikTok, there are a lot more proposed conditions like this that are cropping up because people get to very quickly share their experiences and realize that there are similarities or commonalities between them. And so they'll come up with a term for it. And then eventually it needs to make its way into the scientific research. So this is what I would call a proposed condition. And as it stands, there are no clinical research studies directly investigating ACID. So it definitely falls firmly into that proposed condition category. Before I keep dissecting the research and what I found, let me explain what it actually is or what it's proposed to be. You can probably gather a lot of it from just the name if you break down the terms. But this is a condition specifically in people with bipolar disorder who have been on antidepressants for an extended period of time, typically meaning several years. Just a very quick review. Bipolar is used to be considered a mood disorder. Now it's broken off into its own category. But bipolar is characterized by the manic phase. So mania, meaning heightened energy, a lot of potentially agitation, creative energy, not sleeping for long periods of time, making impulsive decisions, feelings of grandiosity. All of these can represent mania. And mania is the primary component of bipolar, and that's often managed by mood stabilizing medication. There are many different mood stabilizing medications. It could be an atypical antipsychotic like Seroquel. It could be something like lithium. Sometimes even gabapentin is used. Many different things that you can use to try to stabilize that mood so you're de-escalating, de-elevating from those manic phases. Now, bipolar indicates two poles. It's not always the case that people with bipolar have depression, but it is very, very common. And so people who have those both of those poles of bipolar, depression and mania, they might also be prescribed an antidepressant like an SSRI. So say Lexapro or Prozac, something like that, Zoloft. This is pretty important because an SSRI on its own, given to somebody who has bipolar, will often cause them to launch into a manic phase. And sometimes people find out that they had bipolar, not just what they call unipolar depression, because they go get medication and suddenly they're, in a full manic phase of feeling agitated, not sleeping, all of those things. So typically you're going to be using, if you do pharmacologically try to control bipolar, an SSRI or other antidepressant, as well as a mood stabilizer, or just a mood stabilizer by itself. So getting back to ACID, the disorder we're talking about, it's been seen in some people that have taken long-term antidepressants in the context of bipolar that they develop a chronic condition, meaning an ongoing condition of feeling irritable, feeling dysphoric. And dysphoric in this case means feeling just uneasy, very unhappy, unsettled. And then what we call middle insomnia, which is insomnia that doesn't happen at the start of sleep when you're trying to fall asleep, but it happens in the middle of the night. So you wake up, have trouble falling back asleep. So it's kind of that triad of symptoms. Now, looking into this, it's very, very hard to figure out where the term and sort of the constellation of symptoms that they put together was first described. Best I can tell, there's a psychiatrist named, I'm going to potentially butcher his name, but Rif S. El Malak. And he's the head of mood disorder research at the University of Louisville. And I believe he may have coined the term specifically. I'm not totally sure, but in the clinical literature that I was able to review, that's the earliest that I saw it. He published a study in the Journal of Affective Disorders in 2005. And he observed that there seems to be a distinct triad of symptoms, like we talked about, the irritability, the dysphoria, the middle insomnia, that can be seen in people with bipolar who have been on these long-term antidepressants. So there's two main studies that I found from him. In the first one, which is this 2005 study, he presented 6 different cases that appeared to have similar patterns of worsening that could have been due to antidepressants. And they took antidepressants ranging anywhere from 3 to 7 years in this case study, or series of case studies. Now, it's important to point out, case studies absolutely have a place in scientific literature. They're often how we first become aware of something that should even be studied in the first place, right? This is especially true in medical literature. You have somebody who presents with something that is maybe a new type of virus or a presentation of something that doesn't fit with other known disorders. It's important to make case studies about that so that you can put it out there and it can be further studied. But case studies do not provide proof that something exists on its own. There's no causal link established where it's clear that this leads to this. And it could easily be the case for this series of case studies that some other factor those people shared would better explain why they were similar in these ways. So this is super important because if you fast forward a few years, he led another study in 2008 with a bigger team, and this used data from something called the STEP-BD study, so a bipolar disorder study. Best I can tell, this study was a longitudinal study. People with bipolar from various different sites, they were observed naturalistically, meaning they gathered data in a way that they weren't part of a direct experimental study. They were just sort of collecting data in these different locations, and they put it all together into a database. And so in the study, his team, they looked at the data for participants that had a depressive episode and were treated with antidepressants and then followed up with again later in a year. And in his research, he mentions that people who were treated with antidepressants were 10 times more likely to develop those acid symptoms than people who were not. However, when other factors were corrected for in the research, right? Again, this is not an experiment. This is looking at observational data. And when other factors were corrected for, like people who have had previous antidepressant-induced mania, like I talked about at the beginning, this effect was not present, right? So it's a statistical thing where, when you compare people, you might find an effect, but when you look at other factors and try to control for those, it looks like that effect was not actually there. And, it should be noted again, it's not an experiment. This is looking at existing data in a database, trying to discern what might have qualified for those acid criteria. And in the end, in his actual research paper, in the discussion, the team, they talk about the fact that this study does not support the existence of acid as an independent phenomenon. They say rather it's likely part of a broader spectrum of affective switches, so changes in mood due to antidepressants. We know that there are some issues that can be caused by antidepressants long term. This particular thing doesn't seem to be a phenomenon in and of itself, right? So aside from these studies that I talked about and some individual case studies in different papers, and then of course lots of say medical websites like Psychology Today or something that's not a journal, but it's a medical science news website. There's a lot of opinions or summarizing of case studies and the research that are on those. But in terms of actual peer-reviewed clinical literature, there really isn't much out there. But of course, if anybody listening here has some data, some examples of research papers that I don't know about, please feel free to send them over. Always willing to be corrected on that. But as far as I can tell, acid is something that was proposed and kind of left behind, as it doesn't seem like there's a lot of research support for it. Now, let me get back to your question a bit. I want to be clear that I'm not trying to tell you that what you're experiencing isn't real. Obviously, you're the one in your body, you know what you're feeling, and you have some ideas about when this came about, the things, the factors and medications that seem to line up with that. So I'm not trying to tell you that what you're experiencing isn't real, just saying that, that acid thing that you're talking about may not be what we're looking at here because it doesn't seem to be something that has a lot of research support. But even if acid itself may not be the precise way to describe what you've experienced, I want to validate that there are a lot of different ongoing studies looking into possible reasons that some people seem to have a paradoxical response to antidepressants in the long run. There are a lot of different documented cases where somebody has, for various potential reasons, but has a strong positive effect to antidepressants, and then over time has kind of the opposite response where you see more depression or irritation, negative symptoms that you don't want to have if you're taking antidepressants. And there are different hypotheses, different guesses as to why this could be happening. One would be having chronic use of these medications changes the natural activity of neurotransmitters over time. So your body sort of adapts to the presence of the medication, and so it stops producing as much. Or a compensatory response, like your body really, really tries to keep homeostasis. And we know that when you introduce something that's external, like a medication or a stimulant like coffee, whatever, your body actually kind of tries to counteract that a bit because it tries to keep that homeostasis. So it could be that, to counteract the increased neurotransmitter activity, the brain sort of downregulates, and other things as well. People might even say like cytokine or inflammatory responses. We don't really know, but we do know that for some people it is the case that antidepressants over the long term seem to not have not just the same effect, but have almost the opposite effect. Bottom line, though, is we don't know why some people have responses like this and not others. It's a current area of research, and if you're getting into the field of neurology or psychology, anything like that, I'd encourage you to think about looking into this for a topic of research for dissertation, etc. But yeah, I'm not sure exactly what your particular symptoms have been, but it's clear that you've had a rough go of it. And, I'm sorry about that. Aside from the particular response to medication, you also clearly haven't gotten appropriate care overall. You mentioned that you've been prescribed medication and continued on it for a long time, despite clear signs that it isn't helping. And you've been feeling worse and worse and worse. And I just want to say that's not the way that it should be. Psychiatry is a tough field. It's a bit of an art and a science. It's normal to have, for instance, diminishing returns to medication over time. A lot of people, there's books written about this, like Prozac generation, et cetera. But there's a lot of people who, started Prozac in the 80s and it was amazing. And then over time they had diminishing returns. And that's common. It is normal to have that reduced effect over time. And it's also very, very common to need to change medications or adjust the approach over time as you're being treated. And it sounds like for you, you've essentially been ignored and left to feel like it was your fault for not getting any better. I do want to be clear. Medication is not going to do everything for you when it comes to depression. It's absolutely vital for some people. I'm not knocking medication at all. I am on an antidepressant. Well, I'm using it for anxiety, but same medication, Lexapro and SSRI. I've been on, 10 milligrams, a very low dose of it for a good amount of time now, and it's perfect for me. That's what I need. But not everybody. For some, though, it can make a huge difference, especially when your depression or whatever symptoms you're experiencing are so bad that it prevents you from taking good, necessary steps to help yourself. But it's not going to change your lifestyle. It's not going to improve your habits. It's not going to change your relationship to a loved one or your parents. It's not going to eliminate trauma that you've been through. It's typically one piece of the puzzle, and there are others that are just as important. So I think one of the things that you're highlighting here is what can happen when you aren't getting comprehensive care. Again, I don't think this is your fault. I don't think that you have been steered appropriately. And I see similar situations all the time in my work, especially with the older people that I work with as a neuropsychologist. I might have somebody who's in their 60s, 70s, or 80s, and they're on a medication for their mental health, and they have no idea why they're on it. They're just like, oh yeah, it's prescribed that, in the 90s or 80s, and I've just been on that forever. They've been on it for 30 plus years, and it's never been changed, and it's just been there the whole time. So, a lot of people are in situations like this. And again, medications, they're effective for depression, but so is therapy. So is consistent cardiovascular exercise. So is treating, vitamin deficiencies or anything physically that needs to be corrected for. I want to give you some hope that your situation can still improve. In most documented cases where we see this kind of paradoxical antidepressant response, typically it does improve over time when the medications are discontinued. So if you're not on antidepressants now, you are going to likely need to put in some effort and some focus on these other pieces of that puzzle, right? So therapy, if you're not in it, groups, again, exercise, any of the things that we know from research that are supported to help with depression, those are things you're going to want to pour more into while your body is sort of recovering and getting back into the swing of things from those antidepressants. You might also consider other treatments. You've listened to all my podcasts, so you know that I've done some about things like TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation, or ketamine treatments, which I've talked about. Yeah, you deserve to get some help here still, even if the antidepressants aren't going to do it for you. And I would say that emotionally, you're well within your rights if you feel frustrated or even betrayed by the healthcare system. I hope that whatever hard feelings you have, you can use to push you to really focus on heading in directions that are helpful, that maybe don't involve medications, or at least involve a much more hands-on approach. I don't know what the mental health care system is like in Estonia. It's different from place to place, country to country. If you have the opportunity to work with a specialist, like a psychiatrist who can really pay attention to what you've experienced in the past, pay attention to your symptoms now, and try to dial things in the right way for you, that could do wonders. So I'm sorry you've gone through all of this. I really hope this clarifies sort of, what may or may not be happening and some of the options that you have. But overall, thank you very, very much for writing in the question. It's been a good thing to look into. All right, on to the next question. It reads, "Good morning, Dr. Duff. I've been listening to your podcast for a while now, and I appreciate and enjoy the advice, help, and insight you give. Like most people, I have stress with work and family. The company I work for is toxic, but I've been there for over 23 years, and I'm now making decent money with good health benefits and good vacation/sick time bank. I'm usually tired enough at night to fall asleep relatively quickly. However, I wake up in the morning feeling extremely irritated and annoyed by everything. It usually takes me a few hours to calm these thoughts. I start thinking about negative things at work, family and friends that have fallen to scammers and lost money, and things that I really have no control over, like snowstorms, which make my job a lot more stressful and difficult. Do you have any advice on waking up at 4 a.m. and not starting the day irritated? I'm always pondering solutions to issues and how I can help, but there's little to nothing I can do. Thank you." Good question. And yeah, the American dream, right? I'm assuming you're American. It sounds that way. But the American dream, right? Sticking around with a company that probably isn't good for your health, maybe even good for humanity, but the pay is right and you need health benefits, so you're going to stick there. I know a lot of people out there are probably feeling you hard with this question, and it's real. There's a couple things to address here. There's the work situation itself. Second is the issue with sleep and the difficult emotions and such that you're having in the morning. So let's start with the work part. Sorry that you feel like your company is toxic. It can be really hard to feel motivated to show up, try your best when the company culture itself is a drain on your energy and your mental health. And this can be even worse when you're self-aware, when you see yourself performing the job and you're just a cog in the wheel of capitalism just so you can get your basic needs met. That can be really frustrating and it can suck. So I just want to be real about that. You're allowed to feel shitty about it if you do. Obviously, I don't have a lot of information about your work situation, but one thing I would really encourage you to do is challenge the idea that you have no control over it. Many times I see people in situations that are bad or unhealthy for them in the workplace, and they feel powerless when in fact there are opportunities to try to make things better. When money in your job is on the line, it can be scary to feel like you're rocking the boat, but I would just encourage you to have a very honest look at your situation and see if there are elements of it that can be controlled or influenced in some sort of way. Maybe this is you leading the charge on something, trying to change something about the work culture or the environment. Maybe it's asking for what you need, or even confronting somebody about an issue that's gotten out of hand or that's persisted for too long. I'm super fortunate in that my work is also my vocation. It's what I love doing, and it can be stressful at times for sure. I don't always want to go to work. Sometimes I just want to stay in bed and not go, but I'm absolutely in the right line of work, and I wouldn't trade it. It means a lot to me. But that doesn't have to be the case, and it's definitely not the case for everybody. Many people simply work a job to provide them with the resources so they can enjoy their life in other ways. And it kind of sounds like you're in that boat. So if that's the case, you need to make sure that you are finding time to find meaning and enjoy yourself outside of work. If you're letting work stress you out and you're coming home and not doing anything with the resources that your job provides, that's a recipe for long-term pain and burnout. So again, take an honest look at your life. Could you be pursuing any of your interests or passions outside of work that can kind of fill your cup so you're not just constantly being drained? Ultimately, if you know that your job is unhealthy for you, that could require a more drastic change. One kind of mind experiment to do, and this is something that I tell people to do a lot with relationships that they're in romantically, is imagine yourself 10 years from now. Are you going to be okay if you're still in this job 10 years from now? Are you still going to be all right if things continue this way for 10 years and beyond? If not, that should be your indicator that either something needs to change or maybe you need to look at something else, right? So do that thought experiment, look at your situation, and just try to challenge yourself a bit. Now, let's talk about the sleep part. For sleep, I'm glad to hear that you're not struggling to fall asleep at night, but it sounds like you're waking up very early. This is what we would call end or late stage insomnia. And your mind is off to the races at 4 a.m. So journaling before bed is something that I've talked about before on the show, but I think it's a very underutilized skill by many people. One benefit to what you described about your situation is there's some consistency to the things that stress you out and cause overthinking. You mentioned work, family members, the weather. So before you go to bed, I would encourage you to sit down and actually write things out. Write the things out that you're currently stressed about, things that are annoying you, things that you're worried about. Not immediately before your head hits the pillow. You don't want to take it right into bed with you, but maybe 30 minutes to an hour beforehand. And if you don't know what to journal about or how to journal, that's totally okay. It doesn't need to be anything fancy, but I would start with some questions like, how am I feeling? Or what am I worrying about? Literally, just ask yourself that. I do that all the time with myself. I go, okay, what are we feeling right now? Right? How are you feeling? And start there and try to be comprehensive. This is your time to get all of it out. Even if it's the same stuff as last time you journaled, you can write, I'm annoyed because I feel like I'm the only one that's trying to help with grandmother's situation. I probably have the least time out of all of my siblings, but if I don't step up, who will? It's just not fair. It's really pissing me off. This is arbitrary. You said someone in your family has been scammed. I'm not sure what that is, but maybe you can find a parallel here for yourself, right? Even if it's the same things that you have gripes with, just write it out. Personally, I try to keep saying more and more about it. I try to be as comprehensive as possible. If I'm writing, or a lot of times I do this talking to myself out loud, but writing is an even better option. I'll just keep going until I don't have anything left. I feel annoyed. I feel taken advantage of. I feel a little hopeless. I feel frustrated. I feel kind of worried, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And at a certain point, I'm sitting there kind of like searching in my heart, like, okay, is there anything else there? What else do I feel? Is there anything else there? And at a certain point, you've said everything that needs to be said, which is a good thing, right? You've gotten it all out. You're still going to feel it, but at least it's on the page. And then after that, I like to ask myself, does anything need to be done about this? And that's one that will be very important for you, right? Sometimes there is nothing to be done. Sometimes you just need to let a situation play out, wait for it to be over, and just have it pass. Other times, action may be necessary. It could be a logistical thing like, oh, I need to write down so I remember to put something on the calendar. Or it could be something like addressing somebody, texting a sibling saying, hey, I need more support with grandma this weekend. I am burning out and I know you're busy, but I need some help from you. Whatever, right? And so you want to think, is there anything to be done about this? And this altogether will give you a better handle on what's going on in your mind and any actions that you want to remember. It's kind of like unwinding a ball of yarn, right? Imagine you have a ball of yarn that's all tangled up, yarn barf, as I've heard they call it, in your head. And even though when it's there and it's all untidy, maybe it's in a ball, whatever, it's still there. But as you loosen it up, as you separate out the threads and you unwind it, it's more manageable. It's more workable when you finally pull up the threads and want to do something with it. So this is just a process of unwinding that ball of yarn, getting the threads in their place. They're still there, but they're going to be easier for you to work with. And when you don't do this, our brains really, really don't like having lingering problems or lingering things that we haven't figured out yet. So if you don't do this and you just try to go to sleep without putting in any sort of active processing effort, then your brain's going to actually be trying to solve the problem and also rehearse things so you don't forget them while you're sleeping. And it sounds like you're so tired and so worn out from your job that you can go unconscious. But at a certain point, when you've had enough rest, your brain's like, boop, 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 and it boots back up. And it's like, all right, what do we got to figure out? What do we got to do? So I think this could be helpful for you. What I would say is when you finish that journaling, whatever form it takes, that's when you take some time to focus on relaxation. Give yourself a little buffer, a little window to leave those concerns on the page and then move onward to sleepy time. So after you get those things off your chest, take some time to calm down. You might want to do some stretching. You might want to listen to some music. You might want to, sit on your porch and, just get some fresh air, whatever, read a little bit, talk to your spouse, anything like that. And then you move on to sleepy time. you also said it takes a few hours for you to calm down in the morning. And, that's a bit of time. I would say that this is a good prompt for you to look into some other coping strategies, things like deep breathing, or even getting professional psychiatric help, right? Could you start the day with some physical exercise to get rid of that pent-up frustration? Just look for something to actively cope instead of just sitting there and being pissed about the fact that you're pissed, essentially. And then lastly, one thing related to the sleep is just pay attention to what you consume. Sugary foods at night, caffeine during the evening or late afternoon, drinking alcohol before you go to sleep. These can all disrupt your sleep and make it so that you're not getting very quality sleep and you're still tired even though you spent however many hours in bed. So, I'm not trying to lecture you here about all these things, but these are pieces of the puzzle that you should keep in mind when trying to consider what's going awry here. So overall, that's kind of what I got for you. Quick and easy. I hope that these tips give you a starting place, and I really appreciate you writing in. And that's what I have for you guys. I'm going to go pick up my kids from school. I really, really appreciate your attention, and I'll see you next, probably for the last episode of 2024. Wild. Bye, guys.